to hear how you're doing and see how we can help each other. That is the purpose of today's discussion, to hear how your teams are doing and hear how you're doing as an action learning mentor. Specifically, what have you tried with your team, and did it work or did it not work? What are you struggling with? But basically to use this time to help each other develop as learning coaches, as mentors, and also provide each other an update on your team as well. So no real formal structure, but why don't we go around the sort of virtual room and have people share a little bit about their team and challenges or successes. Who would like to start us off?
This is Scott. I'd be happy to.
Okay, Scott, go ahead.
I have a real interesting team this year. They're in 3 different counties. It's 3 people in 3 different counties, and they want to address the childhood obesity issue. So they're picking on a huge topic to begin with. But they've all seemed to have already focused in on a solution.
Okay.
They want to do some sort of food to school or farm to school food program, and then they've gone ahead and gotten involved in different committees related to that. It seems like all 3 of them are doing that as part of their job to begin anyway, part of their day job. And so I've been trying to really get them to focus in on exactly what the question is that they're trying to address, and then not jumping into a solution so quickly, but I'm having a real hard time holding them back. They really want to just start doing something.
Right. This is actually, in my experience, I see 2 things. I see teams that want to jump into, just like your team, right into action. They've already got a solution to even a problem that they haven't even clearly defined yet, but they have the solution already. The other teams that I've seen are the complete opposite. They have so much trouble coming up with a shared project because they have different jobs or different perspectives, that they actually end up spending a lot of time more on the learning versus the action, which is different. But more common is what you've described, Scott, on how do you get them to slow down and recognize that slowing down will eventually help them speed up later on. So I'm going to not give any solutions here and just ask everyone else to jump in and share what advice you have, or have you tried something in your team regarding the same issue? No one's had this issue, or haven't come up with a way to deal with it?
This is Sean Crabtree.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Sean.
Oh, yeah, good you can hear me. I had the phone on mute for a second there, and I didn't know if I had punched back in correctly. Well, I think my group's got a similar issue in that they've picked a large topic. It's 4 of the members in my group actually work for the Lake Cumberland District Health Department. One's an epidemiologist from Barren River, and they seem to be a very task-oriented group, and they work hard, and they're cohesive. They've picked a large topic as far as wanting to get certification standards for preparedness staff. The reason why it's a large topic is thinking about the different systems they're going to have to convince to go along with this. You know, that's the thing. I don't know if they've selected a topic that's actually achievable. Just understanding how all the different people you got to convince this is a good idea and to go along with it. My advice to them, at the first session was, you better start making those contacts now and selling people on the concept now. Otherwise, a year from now, all you're going to do is have a concept you're passing on to another group. Because if you're going to get it implemented, you have to have it sold to the people that can implement it early and get them involved.
So your team is similar to Scott's in that, one, they've taken on a rather large issue.
It's not that they can't come up with the standards. They can. I mean, they've got a good idea of what they'd like to see. It's just, they're not the only ones in the world that's got to agree to this. And you got to sell it to the health departments, and you got to sell it to the DPH and the preparedness branch, and there's going to be all kinds of opportunities for people to be disagreeable with this approach. From people believing that, their preparedness staff are already overworked and underfunded and don't need more work to do, and some people will think that they just assume be using their preparedness money for something else other than staff time. And you really got to get the ideal sold on the front end in order to have a chance for it to be implemented.
But is your project also similar to Scott's in that your team appears to be task-oriented versus sort of
that's what sparked my thought. I mean, they're a very task-oriented group, and they're cohesive, and they're going to work hard, and they're going to get a lot of work done. Whether or not it's work that gets adopted, I don't know.
Right. So one of the things about action learning is that you actually slow the group down in the beginning. Specifically, as Scott was mentioning, how do I slow them down so that they're very clear on what their project is, that it's not only a doable project, but it's the right project for the issue. If they've defined, you want to help them define the issue if they haven't. So sometimes, like Scott's, or even like yours, Sean, it seems like they jump right into, we wanted to do this, and it's big, and they have trouble slowing down or even taking the time to narrow down the project. Scott, let me go back to you, and I guess, Sean, you can think of this too. Did either of your teams use any kind of tool, whether it be root cause analysis or any other project management tool that might have helped them clearly define a project and understand it, slow down a bit to understand?
I missed the first retreat, so I didn't get to be with my group when they selected their topic. By the time I met with them, they were a train in motion.
Okay, great. That was
Sean. And then
Sean,
for me,
right?
if they did use one of those models, they didn't let me know that they've done that.
Okay.
Now, what's helped them focus a little bit was filling out the charter, the team charter.
Okay.
But what seems to have happened is it focused them into 3 separate but related projects, one in each county.
Okay.
And so
and so, Scott, let me ask you, what is it that you think at this point they need to do?
I've been trying to get them to really work on defining what the problem is, and why. Childhood obesity is one thing, but there's so many different components to childhood obesity, and I think what we're narrowing in on is nutrition, and then more specifically on dietary decisions made by children. And then so each component is related to that.
Okay, this is one of the tensions. What you're describing is one of the tensions that an action learning coach, or in your case, an action learning mentor struggles with. How much do I teach them and lead the team versus when I see that they're missing a big step of project management or doing a public health project, and how much do I just let them do what they do and then learn from that, even if it's a mistake? And so there's no easy answer here, but one option would be to ask them a question about what tools they used to come up with a specific problem. It sounds like they haven't used any tools, but they might tell you, well, we don't know what kind of tools to use. In which case, you could teach them. You could put on your teacher hat and teach them, root cause analysis. If you did that, then I would ask the group their permission. I know a tool called root cause analysis, or whatever tool you're comfortable with. Would you be open for me to share that with you? And the other thing is that sometimes we just have to be comfortable that they have picked a direction and they're feeling like they want to go with it. And then your job is to help them learn from what they did or didn't do.
Okay.
I'll stop here and ask other people if they want to chime in and share some experience or wisdom or questions. Ask questions of Scott or Sean.
I'm sorry?
I'm just saying, does anyone want to ask you questions about your dilemma or share?
I'm here for the asking.
This is David Dunn. I don't have a solution, but I think my group is somewhat like the groups previously discussed. Groups tend to want to look at the solution before they consider the problem. However, I think I've got a really good group. They've been working hard, and they have worked pretty good and defined the problem, I think, in a pretty good format. They've worked on their causal loop, and they have spent a lot of time working on the team charter, which we looked at the first retreat. And I think I haven't seen the final draft, but I think it was supposed to be posted today. So I think they're coming along pretty good, really. But I think the same. I would chime in with the same problem of kind of slowing down things, not getting to the solution too quickly.
Yeah, and now if your group pushes back on you slowing them down, which many groups, they may not express it verbally, but you can see maybe in their nonverbal communication that they're sort of just tolerating you asking a question, if you're sensing that. You may want to remind them that some of the things that you'll be doing, which will slow them down, may feel uncomfortable. And the point is to help them stretch and grow. And so when you do that, if you remember our time together, when I visited you in Kentucky, we talked about the learning curve and what happens to people when they're learning something new. You actually enter a space of discomfort. And so reflection and slowing down and breaking apart the problem so that you clearly define it are things that make some people feel uncomfortable. And the point is that they're learning something new, and that it hopefully they'll see the benefit. And it may be not until several months down the road that they see the benefit of you slowing them down. But remind them if they're feeling uncomfortable, that's not a bad thing. So good. Thank you, David, for sharing that. Anyone else want to share or
This is Karen.
Yeah, hi, Karen.
I have an interesting group this year in that they all work in the same place and they know each other very well and they get along really well. So I'm the outsider, and I'm having a hard time keeping my mouth shut.
Why is that?
I don't know. Well, they'll ask me my opinion, and then the first time I say, you know, more important what you think, and then the third time they ask me, I give it.
It is, and forgive me, I'm going to repeat myself from our time when we met in Kentucky, but the more you know about the issue that your team is working on, so if you're a public health practitioner and you're working with a public health team, as a learning coach, the harder it is to keep your mouth shut. Some people, perhaps if they're introverted in their style, may have an easier time. If you're an extrovert, you're really going to struggle. So one of the things, Karen, it sounds like you've recognized that you're speaking up when they push you, but you're going to need to learn how to be comfortable with pushing it back to them. Are you working on that?
Yeah, I'm working on trying to stay quiet and just take notes. When I did that, you know, beginning talk about I'm here to process the emotions that are going on and ask questions, they got real uncomfortable. But they know each other so well that they are actually able to express themselves easily in the group. So nobody shuts up or doesn't say what they're thinking or gets shot down or anything like that. So it's easy in that sense. They get along really well. But
okay.
So they don't have a lot of conflict.
Yes.
But I'm working on staying quiet and just taking notes.
You know, obviously you've all worked in teams, a variety of teams as I have, and some teams just click. And I would say that those are the hardest teams to coach because they click and they don't understand what they've done or what is happening to make it all work so well for them. So it will be, if that's the case, Karen, with your team, if they truly have clicked and they work together well, your job is going to be to help them understand what it is that they've done to create, one, that environment, and two, if you see that they're also high performing, they have a lot of output that's, you know, good output, to help them understand and see what they've done to do that, to create that. And why, in what circumstances, their styles or what they've done on this team might not work in another team. So that will be your challenge.
Okay.
Because that's difficult when they're working well. When they're, it's actually easier to coach a totally dysfunctional team. And that is that anything you do will help them hopefully function a little better.
Okay.
I would challenge you, first of all, I would ask them why they're looking to you.
Okay.
Okay. Why are they looking to you? Why are they not counting on each other?
Okay.
Would be one of my questions. And the other thing I would look for is your team has not experienced any conflict. That may be because they just click and whatever. The other option is that they've never surfaced the conflict.
Okay.
And so as you work with them, I would look to see, to try to get a feel if you don't want groupthink to happen, okay?
Okay.
So you're going to need to use tools. Do you remember Fist to 5?
Yes.
Okay, Fist to 5 for those who either weren't at our training program or have not used it and may have forgotten it, is really just a survey of people. And you use your hand if you're face-to-face with a rating scale of 1 to 5. And so you ask people a question and then ask them to use their fingers to vote. And that allows people to disagree where they might not have if they were talking, Karen.
Okay. All right.
Okay, and then they can talk after, you know, oh, I see, you know, Sally, you rated this only a 2. What would it take to bring you up to a 4 on the same question? What would have to change? Or, but you get people talking about conflict if they're into that group think. So that's the kind of stuff I would be looking for for you on your team. Does that resonate with you in any way?
Sure.
Okay, great. Karen, how is your team doing on selecting a project, working?
They picked teen pregnancy, you know, why despite their best efforts is teen pregnancy continuing to rise in their county. I suggest that they look at data to make sure that's the case, and they worked on their team charter when we were together. They all work in the same place, and so I was just thinking yesterday that probably I need to call them, or, you know, I sent them an email because they can probably just get together and talk, and I'm not aware of it.
Okay. So some of the communication you're missing because they have opportunities to talk when you're not there.
Right.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I'm just wondering why you suggested to them they look at data. I mean, I understand that they should, but why did you suggest that to them?
I think when you make an assumption like teen pregnancy is on the rise, that you should check it.
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree. If I was writing the steps of how to pick a project, I would make sure the science is there. But my question is really, could you have asked a different question? You asked one.
Yeah, I asked other questions too, but I'm having a hard time keeping my mouth shut.
Oh, it goes back to that. Okay.
You know, I realized after the question came out of my mouth that that was a stupid thing to do, that they needed to do that themselves. But,
you know, I think one of the things is, I mean, as learning coaches, one of the things we need to learn to do is ask certain kinds of questions. So asking them the question,
I could have asked them, you know, how do you know this is true, or what brings you to that conclusion? I could have asked questions like that, or is that not right either?
No, I think you're moving in the right direction. Those are the types of questions. You might even ask them, and Scott and David and Sean, those of you who have spoken up so far, you might ask your team, what steps do you need to take to start off a good public health project? And see if they look at the data.
Okay.
And past, you could ask them to reflect. In past
Will you
projects,
say that again? What question should I ask?
I was saying you could ask them, what steps does one need to take to select a public health project and come up with an effective solution. So ask them to brainstorm, what are the steps? And you should see, based on our knowledge of what, you know, how you go about addressing a public health problem, that they've looked at data.
Okay.
You should see that in their list. You could also maybe ask them the same question in a different way. Based on your experience with previous public health projects you've worked on, what did you do that worked well, or what did you not do that you want to make sure that you do for this project? And again, someone may say, well, we never looked at the data, that kind of thing. So what I'm driving at is, how do you get them to use what they've learned from the past, or use what they already know to think ahead for this project without you telling them, hey, go look at the data.
Okay.
Now, there's always this tension, as I said, how much do we teach or tell them versus how much do we let them learn from their own mistakes. And that's always going to be a tension. If you feel like they're missing something critical that you just have burning in your brain, off your tongue, you want it to come out, you can ask them. I'd like to share some of my experience. Is that okay with you? I'm going to take off my learning coach hat and put on a mentor hat.
Okay.
And, so I'm just actually, hopefully didn't make you feel uncomfortable, but I wanted to use your example of
I don't feel uncomfortable. I know I was opening my mouth too much.
Good. I know I've, as a coach, have struggled with that myself. And I write down a lot of notes to keep me from talking. So good. Thank you for sharing that. Someone else want to share where their team is and either a struggle or a success? Valerie?
My team they're working on their charter. They're meeting, I think they're on their third meeting, counting the one at K Philly. And they started off knowing what they were doing, knowing exactly where they wanted to go with this project. And then they've already taken a step back and they're asking more questions now. They were looking at no-show rates, and they were taking the perspective, why don't patients come to the appointments? And now they're asking more questions to include, what can clinics do to accommodate when patients don't show up? I think they realize that, the answers to why don't patients come may be a little bit more than they can do anything for, transportation and financial and all of that. So now they're looking at it from a different perspective as, what can a clinic do to make money when patients don't show up? And I'm not sure where they're going to go with their project, and I don't think they're sure either. And they're a little bit uncomfortable because they really like knowing what they are going to do. But I think they're in a really good learning place right now.
When you slow them down, especially when it seems like to them that it's taking them a long time to come up with a project, that really feels uncomfortable to most people. And again, you're going to have to let them know it's okay, and that it's actually, they're going to start comparing themselves to other teams.
Right.
If Karen's team already has their project, they're going to wonder why they don't have one yet. And they may even be frustrated with you, thinking that you're holding them back.
Yeah.
But you're holding them back for a purpose. I mean, just to get them to come up with a good project, one that's doable, one that's effective, one that they have some passion for. So let them reflect on the discomfort. One of the things you see, as we get closer to the end of your time with your team, we'll talk about how do you debrief and help them debrief their entire experience with you. And one of the things that you may or may not decide to do, but something that I do, is I ask them to create a timeline of their work together. So if they're keeping journals, you want them to keep track of when they were feeling uncomfortable, when they were feeling that they were lacking energy or passion, or when they had a lot of energy. And what you'll find is that when the team gels and decides on a project is a period of very high energy. Right before it, while they're struggling, they're going to be a little frustrated, but then they're going to come around and feel a high energy at that point. It's okay. It sounds like your team is on track. They're asking more questions, and that's exactly what they should be doing. And let them express their discomfort with not having the answer. Leaders, and even in public health, I mean, there's no easy solution to any of the problems that they've selected, or any public health problem. There should always be some discomfort, because there's no easy answer. Good. Valerie, what role have you taken, and how are you feeling?
I really am enjoying this process. I have just been questioning a whole lot. My training is in social work, and I kind of feel like I'm back in that situation where, you know, the person is sitting across from you I feel like they're looking for me for an answer, and I'm just used to, that's my role isn't to have the answer, it's to help you find what's in, you know, what resources you can to come up with the answer, because I won't always be here. And that's just, I'm just kind of falling back on that, and I may be completely down the wrong path, but I'm really enjoying it. It kind of feels comfortable for me, even though they're uncomfortable. So I feel bad at the same time. I feel like I just want to maybe, you know, answer their questions and help them figure out where they're going. But I mean, I feel bad that I'm not doing that, but at the same time, I enjoy the process. That's a strange comment, but
no, I totally understand it. I totally understand it. It is there is a need. I mean, you come with the background, as you said, of social work, which your experience allows people to solve their own issues, which many of us don't have that experience when we enter this role as learning coaches. But your role is to help them learn from what they are doing. And that is allowing them or holding them accountable for having space for learning. That's having space for discussion, having space for discomfort, showing them that learning has a component of frustration with it or discomfort, and that's okay. So it sounds like what you're doing is right on track, and but helping them know that this is exactly what they should be feeling, so that they're not overly frustrated and not seeing the benefit. So good. So you've taken a role of asking them questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're doing? Is there any particular? Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, and then just the reassurance of, you know, you will figure it out, and and I keep reminding them to think back when they came to the first K-Philly, how different the projects that were presented looked, how some of them looked like they were a complete package and some of them looked like they were just getting started, and, you know, how that's the way it's always looked and it's always going to look. There's going to be an array of what the project is, but they're still really focused on their project and getting it done.
Right. So as a cohort of coaches yourselves, some of you will, each of us has different needs personally. You come into this with different needs and interests, and you should always keep those in mind, or try to understand what your needs and interests are, because in the end, what will happen is as your team is presenting, you're going to have feelings about how they present. You're either going to feel, you may feel embarrassed, or you may wish that they presented on all the work they did, but instead they focused on one little difficulty they had. You may feel really proud of them. Hopefully you feel proud of them. But even if they're presenting on things that you wish they had taken this different slant, I say that we each have different needs. That's because in the end, sometimes if you have a high need to yourself to feel like a hero, then you're going to want to keep that in check. Because remember, your job is not to save them, but to help them learn from what they're doing. And they will learn, as we all do, much more if they're exploring and discovering it themselves versus if you're telling them. So as you keep notes in your own notebook as you go along, keep track of how you're feeling and what your own needs are. At the end of every program that I'm involved in, with the coaches get together to discuss, it's interesting what we feel like we need because of our own interest and need. So keep that in mind. As you know, teams go through different stages: forming, norming, storming, norming, performing. Where are your teams now? Is anyone in storming? No? Louise, are you on the phone? Oh.
Yes.
I'm not
Go
sure.
ahead.
Go
ahead, I'm sorry.
This is Louise. They're still sort of
Okay.
forming, trying to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. I'm asking questions to help them get focused and on track, especially with their charter, so they understand, become more focused on what it is they wish to achieve, and then to see if what it is that they're focusing on is actually achievable. So they're still in that forming stage, and then starting to realize that they need to hold each other really accountable if they're going to get anything done.
Yeah. How
The
many
time
people on your
pressure.
team?
There are 3. So it's a smaller team.
Yeah.
So they're not storming yet. I'm waiting.
Yeah, actually, I mean, 3 people, for those of you, what is the range of size of the teams? We've got some with 3 people. We have larger teams. Anyone have a larger team?
This is Sean. My team has 5.
Okay. Great. Okay. The fewer people you have, you know, the less chance, of course, of the conflict, a lot of conflict, and but you also lose some of the diversity of thought, obviously. But 3 people, you can still still have conflict, and you may or may not see it during your time with them. Some of the things that cause conflict, or some of the times you'll see conflict, is around times where things are due, such as like the team charter. If there's a due date, you know, people are rushing, and then they feel that others aren't pulling their weight, or that's a common complaint. But in the forming stage, they're all going to be generally nice to each other. They are forming. Anyone else past the forming stage? Anyone get to storming?
My team certainly feels like they're storming.
Your team feels like they're storming? Did they say they feel like they're storming, or is that your perception?
Oh, that's my perception.
Okay.
They're not using any language like what we're talking today.
Okay, okay. I ask my teams typically, you're, you know, several months into it. Teams go through several stages, forming, where you're getting to know each other. You're very nice to each other, typically, respectful. And then often as teams work together, the differences of opinion come up, and people are trying to stake a claim to, you know, a certain role, and there's a much more conflict. Sometimes you get through that stage easily, and sometimes you don't. And so I'll go over different stages of team development, and then I would ask them, where are you?
Okay.
So you might, that might be a question that you ask them. These are the stages of team development. Where do you think you are right now? And if they say, we're performing, we got right through, we didn't even have storming, then I would ask a follow-up question. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that you didn't have storming? Yeah, you want them again, and you're going to help. Your job also is to help them take what's happening in this experience and link it to other work. So once they've had a discussion, if they allow you time to bring this topic up, once they've had a discussion about this, then I would ask them to think about other teams that they work with or they're part of, and how what they've done on this team versus what they do in their other teams that either help them through storming to performing phase or don't. So ask them to transfer their knowledge and dialogue to other teams. Anyone seeing any evidence of teams or individuals using some of what they've learned so far, either about themselves or from a retreat, a tool, the team charter, and I think someone said, did you do causal loop diagrams? Did I hear you say that? No?
They were introduced to the general concepts.
Okay, great. Okay, so well, whatever tools have been introduced so far, have any of you seen transfer of those tools or new knowledge to their other work? Okay. What does your silence mean right now?
Mine means no.
Mine means no
okay.
as well.
Okay.
Mine means no. They're still talking. They're still trying to jump to the solution. It's so funny.
Okay. Okay.
This is Sean.
Okay, so,
again, I didn't meet with my group the first session, so I'm at a little bit of a handicap. But the second session, when I did meet with them, they were just working away. They kind of already knew what they were doing, and they were working on problem statements and strategizing and things like that. So I didn't see them using any particular tool, though.
Okay. Okay. And you haven't heard anyone say, oh, I tried this back home, et cetera, et cetera. No one's okay. No. You're gonna want to listen for that, and if you're not hearing any of that, then it will be part of your job to ask them questions about how they can use what they're learning back home. And it may be people often jump to, well, I'm using something concrete like a causal loop diagram. I tried that back home. Or, but you may also want to ask them, well, have you learned anything about yourself while you've been in K-Philly or even in this team project that you're able to apply to a different setting back home? Are you learning anything? Have you learned anything about your teammates that now you're using back home? You know that Alex has he's a good data person, so now you're calling him because you know he's good at that. So your job is going to be to listen for that transfer of knowledge, but also hold them accountable for doing that. It's one of the hardest parts about these leadership programs is making sure that there's a bridge for them to do that, and then discussing why or why not why they can't transfer some of the knowledge. I would think, Karen, with your team being, did you say they were all from the same agency?
They're all in the same agency, and they all know each other very well, which is wonderful for them.
Well, it's both good and bad, you know, because one thing is they come with already a culture, and the culture, if the culture is supportive, that's great. If the culture is not, their own working together, if they have a dysfunctional culture, which doesn't sound like they do.
No, they get along pretty well.
That's great. So for your team in particular, you should be seeing a lot more transfer. You've got 3 people from the same agency. You would hope that they're working together to make some things happen.
Okay, I'll look for it.
Yeah, look for that. Great. Okay. so we talked about transfer of knowledge and then stages of teams, stages that your team may be in. And what I'm hearing is that most of you seem to be, your team's in the forming stage. There hasn't been any real obvious, at least, storming. Right? Did I read you correctly there?
Right.
Okay. And that you haven't really seen or heard much discussion, mainly because they're focusing on their action. What are we going to do? And of course, that would be normal at this stage. But no one's really talking so much about what they've tried back home yet. And that's all normal. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
the only thing one of my team members has brought up is that she knows she's a procrastinator and she waits to the last minute. Almost seems like a badge of honor. Whereas we've got another person who is very much time conscious and likes things to get done early. So this has been openly discussed in a jovial manner. So I'll find it interesting to see how that actually pans out as timelines come up and deadlines approach.
Yeah, that can cause a lot of friction. Good. Okay, they've openly discussed it, and you can ask them, so how are you going to meet each other's needs when you're so different in your approach? Good. Okay. Has everyone had a chance to discuss some of where their teams are at? Did we get everyone? Okay. Let me ask you, as far as I know, I think it was you, David. Are you the one, you weren't able to connect with your team for the first meeting?
No, that was Sean.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sean. I'm sorry about that. Sean, you weren't able to connect with your team during the first meeting. In the second meeting, they just jumped right in to work. Can you describe for us how you're feeling about that? Are you feeling like an outsider, or?
No, I'm okay. I think they're. I think they're a cohesive group, and you know, when I redirected them to think about leadership as opposed to, you know, the task, they spent an appropriate amount of time talking about, you know, what they were developing as far as leadership skills through the process, and then we had a little discussion about, you know, how through the process could they each develop their leadership skills, you know, what did they perceive as their weaknesses, and how could they use the Change Master project to strengthen their weaknesses. So, I mean, they pretty well are functioning pretty good. I didn't see them using tools, and I think that, you know, I think they've got a project that might be hard to get implemented if they don't get buy-in early. But I mean, other than that, I think they're okay. From my point of view, part of what you learn in a Change Master project is just how difficult it is to negotiate systems, and how frustrating it is, and how you don't always accomplish. You know, just because something is a great ideal don't mean you're going to accomplish it. So that's part of the learning process. So that don't particularly bother me. You know, I warn them that it might be coming, but when it comes and they learn from it, that'll be okay too.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I'm just, you know, often if you miss particularly the first meeting with your team, sometimes it's a little bit more challenging to establish what your role is with them. And so I was just wondering if you were feeling uncomfortable. It doesn't sound like it, but I just want to check in on you on that, whether or not you feel like they understood your role. As a learning coach is a very different role than most people have experienced. And as Karen said earlier, with them looking to her for answers and then her giving them, that's more common for us on how we usually interact with the team. And so, you know, getting them to understand that your role is different sometimes takes several meetings. And it starts off in the first meeting. So missing the first meeting sometimes makes it a little more challenging to wear that hat. So Now, your first meeting is really important. Your first two meetings, at least your first meeting for sure, where you establish what your role is, that you're going to push back, you're going to be their mirror, you're going to ask difficult questions that may uncover an elephant in the room or things they might not normally discuss in other team projects, or might challenge their mental models or assumptions. You want to get them to that level. And then you also typically ask them to, whether it be in their team charter or in just a discussion, how they're going to balance action and learning. Are they going to give you time on their agenda, or at the end of each meeting will they stop and reflect? What structure will they use or to assure that they're balancing action and learning? So I'd like to ask you at this point, have your team set up any particular, I use the word structure, it's not the best word, but how are they balancing action and learning?
Well, this is Sean again, and
yeah.
In my group, I think we just kind of set a standard rule that we'd spend a few minutes of every time that they met talking about the what had happened during the meeting as far as interaction goes, and what were they learning as far as their leadership. And so we're just making sure we've got time set aside where we get off task and get on to just having a discussion about it.
That's a great idea. I actually, every now and then I'll interject about team formation, but it's not a formal thing like we're setting time aside to specifically talk about it. I like that idea a lot.
So who's speaking now?
This is Scott.
Hi, Scott. Sorry, I'm not up on recognizing everyone's voice yet. Yeah, Scott, it becomes harder as your teams move along, but you may want to stop them. If you have no structure in place, no formal structure in place for learning, you might want to say, may I stop you? Or before we get started, may I bring up a topic? Can we agree on a little bit of structure for learning? At the end of each meeting, can I have the last 10 minutes? And that we only focus on learning. And not on any task or action. Can I ask you to keep a journal? That's, if they're not keeping a journal. So you don't want to throw a whole lot on them at this point, but in general, this would be one of the first things you do with your team is to ask them, how can we set aside time or assure time for learning? It will take place during the meeting, and you will be throwing in questions at times when you think it's appropriate. But the idea that Sean has about assuring that there is time on the agenda is great. And you may also want Sean, as time goes on, first to ask them if you can lead that time, and then as time goes on, see if someone in the group is willing to ask a reflective question. You're trying to transfer that skill of good questioning and good critical reflection onto them. So good. And Scott, you were saying that you don't have any formal structure, but that during the meeting you ask questions.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to share how you're assuring that they balance learning and action?
This is David Dunn. We spent a considerable amount of time at the first meeting talking about these very things. And particularly, we talked about the fact that there were a lot of ways to accomplish this through journaling or reflection or whatever. And I think the committee generally agreed, and I haven't seen the latest version of the charter, but I think they generally agreed that they would set aside a time at the end of each meeting to do some reflective discussion and talk about these issues. They also spent quite a bit of time at the first meeting on the organizational structure of their group, of who would be leading and who would be responsible when the leader's not there and that kind of thing. So I think they got off to a good start.
Very good. I'm just going to restate some of the things that I do for structure. And again, you don't have to change anything that you're doing now. It's just, you know, in the future, if any of these ideas sound like things you want to try, that'd be great. I always ask my teams, and again, it depends on how much time you have with your team. If you have the time that I have, like 3 or 4 hours with the team, which is almost unheard of in a public health setting, but if you have that kind of time, I ask all my teams if they would be willing to do 20 minutes at the beginning of the meeting and 20 minutes at the end for just learning. I ask them each to keep a journal throughout the process, even if it's uncomfortable. Some people hate journaling, but I'll ask them to do, if they'd be willing to do that. I ask them if they'd be willing to allow me to intervene at any time to ask a question, which they may not see why it's relevant, but I ask them to trust me that the question that I ask I think is relevant at the time. I also ask them that when I'm not there, that there is someone that they select as the lead learning person, and that person's role is not really to be a coach, but to throw out a question that they might reflect on sometime, probably at the end of the meeting as well. So those are sort of my standard things that I do for the meetings that I'm part of. And when I'm part of a meeting that's more virtual, like I'm on the phone, I'm just listening, and again, they will have someone that asks a reflective question versus me taking a lead in their learning. But your job is to get them to be accountable, that they're balancing learning with action, which is really hard to do if you don't have some agreement on that. How about others? Thank you, David, for sharing how you spent that first meeting discussing how they would spend their time.
David, you're probably talking with the mute on.
Is David trying to talk?
No, I'm not talking.
No? Okay. Well, I'm going to ask each one of you how you're balancing action and learning. So I think we've heard from Sean and Scott and David. Karen?
Well, I took some time at the time that we met. I took some time at the beginning to talk a little bit about my role and ask them questions about what they thought about that. And I took a little bit of time at the end to summarize and to ask them how they felt about the process. But I guess I can build structure into every meeting. I haven't done another meeting yet.
Okay. Well, that's a good, actually, Karen, you just made me realize that we haven't shared how many times you've met with your group. So, Karen, how many times have you met with your group?
Once.
Oh, just once. Okay. Are you doing plan to do any virtual meetings with them?
Well, I guess that's what I realized this week was that because they work in the same place, they're probably talking. In the past, you know, we would email back and forth about when we would meet. We'd either talk on the phone or meet in person, and they've been quiet, probably because they're meeting without me. So I emailed them to ask them, you know, what they have set up and when I can come down and visit.
Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I forgot that you said that. Okay. Yeah, I think you want to make sure that you're connected with the
right,
group.
and only one of them has joined the Ning site, and there's been no conversation there either. So I'm sure it's because they're in the same place. They were talking, but they don't feel the need to connect electronically.
Yeah.
So I need to make my presence a little better known.
Yeah, I would definitely, while I tend to lean on being a fly on the wall as a coach, there are times when I think you have to assert yourself, and this would be one.
Right.
I would really push, I think you're right on target with push them to include you,
Right.
And make sure they include in their team charter how they plan on keeping you in the loop.
Okay.
It's a real important skill for them to have when they work with stakeholders in any project, to know how do you keep people in the loop.
Okay.
So good. Okay, thank you. So you've met once with your team. Okay, great. How about Louise? How many times have you met with your team, and did you have any conversation about any formal structure for learning?
We met in Pine Mountain just briefly when we formed and had that luncheon with everyone, and then we met one time in person outside of that, where they started working on their charter and on their ground rules for the team. The team agreed to, at the time, to set aside the first 10 minutes for check-in and some learning between meetings, and then the last 15 minutes. And with 3 people, that seems to be workable. I may encourage them to do a little more later if they need, if it seems that they need it, but that's what they've got right now.
That's great. That's great. So check-in in the beginning. Well, is check-in relationship building or check-in a real learning? Well, relationship building is learning, but other forms of learning during the check-in, or?
Sort of what they have learned about themselves or about leadership between meetings as they've worked on various projects or not worked on them. And if they want to add anything personal, they jump right in right there. So it's a mix of both. Okay.
One thing that you might find as a team gets to know each other, if your people don't know each other well, that the check-in or the relationship time becomes longer and longer. So you want to make sure that what they're learning, the things that they're focusing on for learning, vary. Both they're learning from their project, they learn about how they make decisions, they learn about each other. So make sure that they're spending time reflecting on various things that they can learn about.
Okay.
So good. Well, that sounds great that you have some structure there. Are your people keeping a journal?
I did not bring that up at the last meeting, and I'll have to ask them. I had mentioned that in Pine Mountain, but it didn't come up at this meeting.
Okay. If they decide not to keep a journal, you'll want to keep pretty good notes about the history of their team, so that at the end of your time together, you can help them recreate that team, what's happened, their team history.
Okay.
Great.
Now, how does my journal of keeping track of the team I don't know, I guess I'm still getting my head around it. Shouldn't they be keeping this journal if they are going to? Okay, because once again, I'm thinking I don't want to have to be, as a mentor, I don't want to take on the work. I would prefer that the team do that. So I guess it comes back to me really encouraging those members to keep that journal so that they can actually see growth.
Yeah, you can, we could brainstorm many ways to do this, but I actually always require my team members to keep journals. But they agree to that in the beginning. So if they don't agree to that, then what you'll want them to do in their last 15 minutes of reflection is to jot down a couple notes about this team meeting, so that someone's keeping those, at this team meeting, and they've kept all these little reflections. At the end of your time together, they can post them along the timeline. But I agree with you. You always want them to do the work, if you can. The plan B would be if you're keeping a few notes on what's happening at each team meeting, and at the end you could throw that up. But I think your idea is much better. It's not only making them do the work, it's that by doing the work they actually learn from keeping track of their history.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and they're keeping track of not only, I'm not talking about keeping minutes. We're talking about, you know, a few bullets about, you know, how am I feeling? I have no energy for this project because X, Y, Z, or I feel really energized because X, Y, Z. So they're keeping different notes than they are typically used to keeping about their meeting, in addition to maybe some key action steps that they took.
Okay.
Great. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Louise. Let's see. I think we heard from Scott and Sean and David. How about Valerie? Valerie, how many meetings?
They are having their third meeting tomorrow. And
okay.
The first meeting I asked them if I were to bring them a journal, if they would feel comfortable keeping a journal, and, you know, if they would commit to writing and reflecting after each meeting. And they did. So I brought them a journal the next meeting, and so they're journaling every time. But I also asked for like 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning and 10 or 15 minutes at the end, but all that they really wanted and would commit to was the last 10 or 15 minutes. So that's basically how they, you know, that's what they agreed to. So that's what we're doing.
Okay.
They work on their project as soon as they get there, and then they kind of let me ask questions and just talk about what they've experienced for the last 10 or 15 minutes, however long.
Why do you think they didn't want to give more time?
You know, that was the first meeting. They may, if I ask them today, they might do something different. I don't know. You know, that's a new concept to everybody. You know, they thought that they were signing on to learn how to be a leader and to do a project. And time is, you know, time is hard to come by. So I'm assuming that their decision was because they wanted to spend every minute that they were together getting a project done, because they did at the beginning know what they were going to do, and you know, like I said, they're away from that now, but in the beginning they knew what they were wanting to do. So
I think that's a really valuable reflection that you're sharing with us right now, and this is, again, very common. That people will say that they value learning if you ask them, is your organization a learning organization? Are you a lifetime learner? They will say that they are, and in fact, I mean, here they are in a program that is developmental, K-Philly. The truth is, though, when you get to the nitty-gritty, that people have trouble giving themselves time to learn and seeing it as valuable. And so as much as you can, ask them, what does it mean to be a learning organization? Or what does it mean to be cutting edge and personally learning all the time? How much time does that take? And so see if they will allow that kind of dialogue, because it's really important to be a top-notch public health innovative public health professional. You've got to be able to give yourself time to learn and reflect. So good. So they're keeping a journal and they're allowing 10 or 15 minutes at the end. Are you leading that, Valerie, or are they?
I'm leading the end right now. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's great. That's great. Good. Okay. Anyone, has this discussion and sharing brought anything into someone's mind that you'd like to share or throw out to the group as a particular challenge, or you're looking towards the future and wondering what others are doing? No one? Okay, so you're all feeling okay about where you are right now, and we've discussed a couple challenges that either you individually are having or your team is having. I'm going to throw out a reflective question right now. If you are keeping a journal, I'd like you to pull that out. And my question is, if you would write down, at this point, what are you learning about being a learning coach? Not a mentor or subject matter expert. What are you learning right now with your team about being a learning coach? And I'm going to, you may recall that this tool is called Stop, Reflect, Write, and Report. Not a very clever name, but that's really what you're doing. You're stopping, you're reflecting on a question that I just posed. You're writing down your answer, and I'm going to ask you to read exactly what you wrote. So don't elaborate in any way. There's no right or wrong answer. So I'm going to shut up for the next 2 minutes.
Will you repeat the question first?
Yes. What are you learning, you personally, learning about being a learning coach for a team? Is that clear enough, or any questions about the question? Okay, so take the next 2 minutes and write down something that I will ask you to read. Okay. Before I ask you to just read what you wrote, I first want to ask you, how did you feel about the amount of time that I just gave you? Is there anyone that felt like that was too much time or not enough time?
Just right.
Just right. Okay.
Yeah.
Did anyone? It was fine. Did anyone start doing other work, like writing your shopping list or doing something other than what I asked?
No.
Feel free to
No, I
say
didn't.
if you did. No one? No one did? Okay. All right, great. One of the things you want to just learn about yourself is how easy or difficult it is it to reflect for yourself. And that was only, I think, went a little longer than 2 minutes, but it wasn't much time. And if we're trying to help these individuals become reflective practitioners, they need to understand how comfortable or uncomfortable it is to reflect and why it is difficult. Do they not know what questions to ask themselves to reflect? Or so you help them to explore that feeling. Okay, so let's again just go around the virtual room. I'm going to ask you to read what you wrote and not to elaborate in any way. Oftentimes when we go around the room, someone else's answer reminds us of something, or you agree with it, and so you change your answer. But I'm going to ask you not to do that. This is just the top of the head reflection. Again, no right or wrong answer. So I'm just using our list on our WebEx here, and so I'll go in this order. If you don't feel ready or comfortable, you can just say pass. David?
I wrote down that I am learning that at times it's okay to be assertive as a coach, but you have to choose the right time to be assertive.
Great. Thank you, David. Karen?
I wrote down, this is more difficult than I thought it'd be. I have a lot to learn. It's very exciting, and I'm going to work on using these techniques more eloquently.
Thank you, Karen. Louise?
I wrote, it's difficult not to want to jump in and try to keep the team on track and lead the meeting. I have to be creative and intervene with questions instead of advice or direction.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Scott?
I wrote, in a team in which everyone is trying to learn to be a leader, it's hard to get cooperation. And then lastly, it's hard to, quote unquote, lead a team of leaders.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
I wrote that I'm learning to focus more on team development and less on leadership development rather than on tasks.
Okay. Valerie?
It takes effort. It is uncomfortable sometimes to not be able to answer their questions. Sometimes I want to ask leading questions to, in a roundabout way, give them the answer. I feel like the group sometimes wants more than or something different than a learning coach, and I still feel like sometimes I do not know the correct question.
Great. Oh, wow. Those are really great reflections. One of the things, Valerie, I'm just going to jump off of your last comment, that I think maybe the next time we should talk more about when we meet is the types of questions you can ask. And again, Valerie, I'm not sure if it was you or someone else's comment about using questions or asking questions that actually are more leading than they should be or could be. So perhaps we can talk about why it is we ask questions like that and what other kinds of questions we might ask, because we all do it. We could ask a million questions in a meeting, and we don't want to take up that much airtime. So we often have to just pick one or two questions that we ask them during the meeting. And we are, in a sense, asking them to focus on things that we want them to focus on. So in some way we are leading them, but we have to be careful with that. So I think I'd like to ask you, as you are working with your teams, or even in between meetings with your teams, if you would keep track of the types of questions you're thinking about asking, and the questions you actually ask, and then let's talk about you know, how did they do? How was that question? Did it fall flat, or did it turn the discussion around? Would that be useful to you in our next session?
It would for me.
Okay. Does anyone else have something they'd like to talk about the next time we get together? Okay. Great. And was this helpful to you? Or is there something we should do differently next time?
It was helpful to me. This is Karen.
Okay.
Yes.
Same here.
Helpful.
Great. Well, I appreciate, and I believe I'm speaking for everyone, I appreciate your openness and willingness to share both struggles and successes. That's how we all learn. So I appreciate that. And if we have no more, then I'll adjourn the call, and the next time we'll focus a little bit more on when to intervene and what kinds of questions might be helpful to you as your teams progress. Okay?
Great.
Okay, this is Karen. Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Donna.
everyone. Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.